The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Again, Jesus left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the district of the Decapolis. And people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment and begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him off by himself away from the crowd. He put his finger into the man's ears and, spitting, touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And immediately the man's ears were opened, and his speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. He ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished, and they said, He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord. Anytime you get a reading from the letter of James, it's an exciting time. This man does not mince words. I think, was it last week or maybe it was on a weekday, where he says, any man who cannot control his tongue thinks he's devout. He's a fool and his worship is pointless. He's very, very good, James. He says that the human tongue is like a burning fire that sets ablaze an entire forest. Right? One little misspoken word. And here again, James just speaks very, very bluntly to the point that it's almost not necessary to preach about anything. If you show partiality, so that in church, when a rich man comes in with gold rings and fine clothes, and you say that you treat him well, and then someone who's poor comes in and you treat them not as well, he says, you're evil men with evil designs. Are you not like everybody else? Have you missed the point? But then he goes even further, to the point that it's not just about not showing favoritism between the rich and the poor. He goes even further than that. Did not God choose those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs to the kingdom that he's promised to those who love him? We see frequently throughout the scriptures that the promises that God makes again and again and again are promises to the poor. He promises to deliver the poor. The Jews themselves are always the poor, almost. They are the ones who are small, who are overlooked, those who are weak as compared to the rest of the nations, those who are powerless in face of people who are far stronger than them, and they have no hope of having any control over what happens to their land, right? There's an inherent, the church calls preferential option for the poor. We see in the scriptures this movement of the Lord towards the poor, to the point that even here he says, right, they were chosen. Jesus, I love, says to his followers, or Paul says to the people, not many of you were wise as regards the world. Not many of you were important, right? He says, and yet, right, God has given you all this. That's the idea. You get this impression in the scriptures. The poor are chosen as a sign. God allows poverty in the world, and I'll talk about you too in a minute, right? He allows poverty and weakness as a sign of what he's going to accomplish. When he came, he looked to them, right? Whenever he prophesies, he says, the lame will walk, the blind will see, the deaf will hear. Why? Because you are poor. That's the whole idea, right? You are poor. And whenever you see the poor who are poor in the world, in whatever sense that that means, as we'll say in a minute, you ought to feel a certain kinship with them because of how poor you are in yourself. I mean, we human beings, we're so easily misled, right? We judge by appearances so easily. We get so distracted. Right? We share the goodness that God gave us, and yet your heart is constantly torn between earthly desires and this desire for heaven. You wake up in the morning with all these good plans, and then evening comes, and all those good plans are gone. Right? Nighttime you is just oh boy. Morning you is probably much nicer, right? Much more dedicated. Or we have all these ideas about being kinder and more gentle, and then someone says something that annoys us, right? Or we have all these goals to be pure of mind and to hold our tongue, and then the gossip starts, and it's very hard. We're so poor in virtue. Even that's allowed by God providentially. He allows you to have these flaws because they make you rely on him. Right? He allows us to have these flaws because they are a sign to ourselves and to others that it is his action that saves. He could just remove all your flaws right now if he wanted to. God's all powerful, can do whatever he wants. Right? Completely free you. He doesn't. Just like he doesn't just fix the poverty in the world. There's a sign, there's a providence going on here. There's some kind of providential dance that the Lord has created. I want to say that you need to think about poverty in many different ways, because so many times the Lord tells us to move towards the poor, to go to serve the poor. As I said, they are a reminder to you of how poor you are. And so you should feel a certain kinship with the poor. But he wants us to understand that in a bunch of different ways, right? There's many, many different kinds of poverty that we should move towards. As sort of a funny aside, I remember in seminary one time, we were having like a formation thing, and they kept talking about trying to go out and look after those students who don't have any other friends and everything. And right afterwards, everyone went and started hanging out with this one guy. I thought, uh-oh, you think he realizes that he's the guy that no one else wants to spend time with? You think he realizes that he's the one who's really kind of hard to get along with and listen to? He's a little sort of phase shifted. It doesn't seem to always quite keep up with everybody. But will someone go and look and love him? He is one who is poor. Will someone look to someone in their own family, right, who is disconnected, the one who is overlooked? Will one look to their class, right? Who's the one who no one else wants to sit with or be near? Jesus moves towards that. He moves towards the poor. He moves towards those who have less. He moves towards those who have no one else. I remember when I was in a freshman year in high school, my principal, Brother David, coming and tapping me on the shoulder at lunch and saying, "Hey, there's a student over there, Billy." He says, "No one's been go be his friend." Okay, sure. Yes, brother. Yes, of course. That's the symbol, right? That's that sign to move towards. So, just encouragement today to keep that in mind, to understand the reason God allows us to see these things is to remind us of our own poverty. We need to move towards it because there's a certain kinship that we have, right? But there's many different ways to be poor, right? There's many different ways to be poor. There's poverty in wealth. There's poverty in friendships. There's people who just aren't very good at interacting with other people. It doesn't come easily. They are poor. So let us consider today, what does it look like? What does it look like to show no partiality? What does it look like to move towards those who are poor? What does it look like to behave like Christ?